The Mafia boss who'd spent 17 years hunting for his missing sister grabbed Charlotte's arm so hard she gasped. But it wasn't the grip that terrified her. It was the way his face drained of color when he saw her scar. "Who are you?" he whispered, and Charlotte didn't understand why 3 faded lines on her forearm made the most powerful man in the underworld look like he was staring at the dead, until masked gunmen stormed the estate 4 hours later with orders to kill her before she remembered too much. Charlotte Williams' legs burned as she climbed the grand staircase of the Storm estate, arms full of fresh linens she'd been carrying for the last 3 flights. 16 hours. That's how long she'd been on her feet, scrubbing marble floors and polishing silverware in the East Wing while the rest of the staff had long since clocked out. The agency never warned her the Storm family expected miracles from temp workers, but she needed this job too badly to complain. November rain lashed against the towering windows, each gust of wind making the old mansion creak like it was breathing. She paused on the landing, adjusting her grip on the linens before they could topple. Her sleeve rode up as she shifted the weight, exposing the faded double V scar carved into her left forearm. She barely glanced at it anymore. Just another ghost from a childhood she'd spent 28 years trying to forget. The hallway stretched before her, dimly lit by crystal chandeliers that cast shadows across Persian rugs and oil paintings of Storm ancestors. The silence felt heavy, unnatural, like the house itself was holding its breath. Then a door slammed somewhere behind her. The sound cracked through the quiet like a gunshot. Charlotte's heart jumped into her throat. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, deliberate and unhurried, each one landing with the weight of authority. She told herself to keep moving, to mind her business, the way she'd learned to do in every home she'd ever worked. But her feet had frozen to the burgundy carpet. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the hall. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of confidence that came from owning everything he touched. Bruno Storm. Charlotte had seen him exactly twice in 3 years, both times from a distance, and both times she'd made herself invisible. The maids whispered about him constantly. The boss, the heir, the man who controlled half the East Coast from this very estate. He wore power like other men wore cologne, and right now, every ounce of that power was focused directly on her. He didn't speak, didn't slow his approach, just stared at her arm where her black sleeve had slipped past her elbow, revealing the scar in the chandelier's light. Charlotte watched his face change. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a slight narrowing of his dark eyes, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. Then his expression cracked open completely, confidence replaced by something raw and dangerous, something that looked almost like recognition, almost like grief. He was moving before she could react, crossing the distance between them with startling speed, his Italian leather shoes silent against the carpet. Charlotte stumbled backward, linens tumbling from her arms and scattering across the floor. Her spine hit the carved railing behind her. There was nowhere to go. "Let me see your arm." His voice was low, controlled, but underneath it ran a current of barely restrained intensity. The faint Italian accent made each word feel sharper somehow, more deliberate. "Mr. Storm, Charlotte started, but her voice came out strangled. Wrong. He didn't wait for permission. His hand shot out and caught her wrist, not crushing but utterly immovable, and pulled her arm toward him. The motion was so sudden she gasped, instinctively trying to pull back. His grip tightened just enough to stop her. He turned her forearm over slowly, exposing the pale scar tissue under the golden light. 2 V's intertwined, the lines crossing at angles that might have looked random if you didn't know they'd been carved with precision, with purpose. Bruno Storm stared at the mark like he'd seen a ghost. The color drained from his olive-toned face. His thumb traced the edge of the scar, so gently it sent an involuntary shiver up Charlotte's arm. When he looked up, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Where did you get this?" The question came out quiet. Too quiet, like he was restraining something massive beneath the surface. "Who are you?" Charlotte's heart hammered so hard she could hear it in her ears. I don't know what you mean. It's just an old scar. Please, Mr. Storm, don't lie to me." His grip on her wrist shifted, his other hand coming up to frame her forearm completely. as if he needed to make absolutely sure the mark was real. This isn't just anything. Where did you get it? Two men appeared behind Charlotte before she'd even registered their approach. The larger one, built like he'd been carved from stone with a twice broken nose, positioned himself at the top of the stairs, blocking her only exit. The other, leaner but somehow more frightening, stood to her right, his hand resting inside his suit jacket in a way that made Charlotte's stomach drop. She'd grown up in rough neighborhoods. She knew what that gesture meant. Before we get started, don't forget to give this video a like, hit that subscribe button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your support helps us bring you even more incredible stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into the story. The few other staff members who'd been lingering in nearby rooms had suddenly vanished. Doors closed softly. Footsteps retreated. The mansion that had felt too quiet before now felt like a tomb. "My name is Charlotte William," she forced out, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "I'm a maid. I work for the estate. That's all." "That's not all." Bruno's jaw clenched. He looked down at the scar again, and this time Charlotte saw it clearly, the pain written across his features barely concealed by the mask of control he was trying to maintain. "My sister had this exact mark. The same design, the same placement. She disappeared 17 years ago." His eyes snapped back to Charlotte's face, searching for something. "So I'll ask you one more time. Who are you?" The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow. Sister. Disappeared. 17 years. Fragments of memory tried to surface, a dark room, a little girl's voice, trembling hands holding broken glass, but they slipped away before she could catch them, leaving only a hollow ache in her chest. "I don't know," she whispered, and it was the truth, the most terrifying truth she'd ever spoken. "I don't remember." Bruno Storm studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he released her wrist and stepped back, though not far enough for her to feel safe. He pulled a phone from his pocket without breaking eye contact. "Marco," he said into the receiver, his voice now completely controlled. "Cold. Lock down the estate. No one leaves until I say so, especially not the maid on the second-floor landing." He paused. "And get me everything, every file, every record, every piece of information we have on Charlotte William. I want her entire history on my desk in 1 hour." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his jacket. When he looked at Charlotte again, something had shifted in his expression. The grief was still there, but now it was accompanied by determination, by obsession. "You're not going anywhere," he said quietly. "Not until I understand why you're wearing my sister's mark." Charlotte's hands were shaking, her mind was racing through possibilities, run, scream, fight. But every option led to the same conclusion. She was trapped, in this mansion, with this man, with guards who wouldn't hesitate to stop her, and with a scar she couldn't explain, connecting her to a girl she couldn't remember. "Please," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I don't know anything about your sister." "Then you're going to remember." Bruno Storm's words weren't a threat. They were a promise. He bent down and picked up one of the fallen linens, holding it out to her in a gesture that might have been polite in any other context. "Come with me, Miss William. We have a lot to discuss." As Charlotte took the linen with trembling fingers, she caught sight of her reflection in one of the gilt-framed mirrors lining the hallway, a 28-year-old black woman in a maid's uniform standing in a mansion that cost more than she'd earned in 10 lifetimes, being interrogated by a man whose family controlled an empire. She looked exactly like what she was, powerless, invisible, insignificant. But the way Bruno Storm was looking at her, like she held the answer to 17 years of searching, told her everything had just changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. And she wasn't sure if that was better or infinitely worse. The storm outside intensified, rain battering the windows with renewed fury, as Bruno gestured toward his private study at the end of the hall. Charlotte walked forward on unsteady legs, flanked by the two guards, acutely aware that her entire life had just fractured into before and after, before she climbed those stairs with linens in her arms. And after Bruno Storm saw the scar. Bruno Storm's private study existed in a different world than the rest of the estate. Where the halls outside gleamed with polished marble and gold-framed ancestors, this room was all dark wood and leather, books lining walls from floor to ceiling, the scent of expensive whiskey and old paper thick in the air. Charlotte had never been past the servants' corridors before tonight. Now she was being shoved through a door no maid was ever supposed to see, let alone enter. The leather chair Bruno pointed to sat in the center of the room like an interrogation seat. Charlotte remained standing, her legs trembling but her spine straight. Behind her, she heard the heavy click of the door closing, followed by the unmistakable sound of a lock turning. The two guards positioned themselves on either side of the exit, arms crossed, expressions blank. She was trapped. Bruno moved to the massive desk that dominated the far wall, his movements controlled but barely containing the tension radiating from him. He didn't sit. Instead, he braced both hands on the desk's surface and stared at Charlotte with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the floor. "Sit down. I'd rather stand. I wasn't asking." His voice dropped lower, and Charlotte found herself sinking into the chair despite every instinct screaming at her to stay on her feet. The leather was cold against her back. She gripped the armrests to stop her hands from shaking. Bruno circled around the desk, pulling his own chair out, but not sitting in it. Instead, he perched on the edge of the desk directly in front of her, close enough that Charlotte had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. The power dynamic was deliberate, calculated. She'd seen this kind of intimidation before in social workers' offices, in police stations when she'd aged out of the system. But this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. "Where did you grow up?" The question came sharp and immediate. Charlotte swallowed hard. "A lot of places. Be specific." "Brooklyn, mostly. Different group homes until I was 18. Then I moved around for work." "What homes?" Bruno's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. "Give me names, addresses, everything." "I don't remember all of them. It was a long time ago. Try harder." He leaned forward, his dark eyes boring into hers. "Because my sister disappeared from a foster system in Brooklyn. So you're going to remember every single place they put you, Miss William, or we're going to be here all night." Charlotte's breath came faster. The memories she'd spent years burying tried to surface, sharp-edged and painful. There was one on Parkside Avenue. I was there when I was maybe 6 or 7. It wasn't really a home, more like a holding facility. Kids came and went. What else? Another one in Flatbush. They called it Hope House, but there wasn't much hope in it. The words were coming faster now, pulled out of her against her will. I was there until I was 10. Then they moved me somewhere in Brownsville. I don't remember the name. Just that it was always dark inside. The windows had bars. Bruno's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or confirmation of something he'd already suspected. "The scar," he said, his voice quieter but no less intense. "Who carved it into your arm?" Charlotte's hand instinctively moved to cover her forearm, but Bruno caught her wrist before she could hide the mark. His grip was firm, but not painful. Just inescapable. "I don't know," she whispered. "You don't know or you don't remember." "I don't," Charlotte's voice cracked. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing in. "I don't remember. I was a kid, maybe 7, maybe younger. We were in a room, a dormitory. It was dark except for a little bit of light from the hallway. There were bunk beds, metal ones that squeaked when you moved." She could see it now. Fragments assembling like a broken mirror. The memory came in flashes, disconnected and terrifying. "There were other kids," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "but they kept disappearing. One day you'd wake up and someone's bed would be empty, stripped clean like they'd never existed. The counselors said they got adopted, but..." She trailed off, a chill running down her spine. "But what?" Bruno's voice had gentled slightly, though the intensity in his eyes remained. "But we heard them crying at night. In the vans outside, and then silence." Charlotte's hands were shaking now, the tremors visible. "There was a girl, small. She had her hair in these tight braids with colored beads at the ends. She slept in the bunk next to mine. She was terrified. Said her brother was looking for her, that he'd come get her soon. But she had to stay alive until then." Bruno went completely still. "She had a piece of broken glass hidden under her mattress," Charlotte continued, the memory sharpening with each word. "She said we needed to mark each other, so if we got separated, if they took her, someone would know. Someone would remember. We'd find each other again. Tears were streaming down Charlotte's face now, though she hadn't noticed when they'd started. It hurt so much, but she promised. She promised we'd be sisters, that the mark meant something. Bruno stood abruptly and moved to a locked cabinet on the far wall. His hands shook as he worked the combination. Charlotte watched through her tears as he pulled out a folder, yellowed with age, and withdrew a single photograph. He returned to her, holding it out with both hands like it was something sacred, something fragile. Is this her? Charlotte took the photograph. It showed a girl, maybe 9 years old, with rich brown skin and hair pulled back in elaborate braids decorated with colorful beads. She wore a yellow dress and was smiling at the camera, but her eyes held a sadness that made Charlotte's chest ache. And there, visible on her forearm as she reached toward whoever was taking the picture, was the unmistakable outline of two interlocking V's. The world tilted sideways. Charlotte knew that face. She knew those eyes. She knew the exact pattern of those braids because she'd watched someone weave them by candlelight, fingers moving with practiced precision. She knew the way this girl's smile never quite reached her eyes, and she knew the sound of her voice whispering in the dark. Don't forget me. Promise you won't forget. Vanessa, Charlotte breathed, and the name unlocked something massive inside her chest. A grief she'd been carrying for 20 years without understanding why. You remember her? It wasn't a question. Bruno's voice was raw, stripped of all control. I remember, Charlotte sobbed, pressing the photograph to her chest. I remember her. She said her brother would come for her. She said his name was... She looked up at Bruno, understanding crashing over her like a wave. She said Bruno would save her. The man before her seemed to crack open, pain and rage and desperate hope warring across his features. He took the photograph back with trembling hands, staring at his sister's face like he could will her back to life through sheer force of wanting. When he finally spoke, his voice was iron-wrapped in silk. You're not leaving this estate, not until I know everything. Every memory, every detail, every moment you spent with her. He looked at Charlotte and she saw the obsession igniting behind his eyes like a flame catching tinder. You're the only person alive who can tell me what happened to Vanessa, which means you're the most valuable thing I own now. I'm not a thing. You're whatever I say you are until I find my sister. Bruno moved to the door, gesturing to his guards. Marco will show you to a room in the East Wing. You'll stay there. Guards posted outside, and if you try to leave, you'll be stopped. If you try to call anyone, your phone will be confiscated. Consider yourself in protective custody, Miss William. You can't keep me prisoner, Charlotte said, but her voice had no strength behind it. Bruno paused at the door, looking back at her with eyes that held no mercy. Watch me. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through Charlotte's bones. She sat alone in the study for a long moment, the photograph of young Vanessa still lying on the desk where Bruno had left it, smiling out at a future she would never reach. Charlotte William had walked into the Storm estate as a maid. Now she was a prisoner. And somewhere in the forgotten corners of her memory, a little girl with braided hair was waiting to be found. The room they gave Charlotte in the East Wing was nicer than any place she'd ever lived. Cream-colored walls, a four-poster bed with silk sheets, windows overlooking the estate's rear gardens where security lights cut through the rain-soaked darkness. It would have been beautiful if it weren't a cage. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her maid's uniform, and stared at the door where Marco stood guard on the other side. She'd heard his radio crackle twice in the last hour, terse communications she couldn't make out through the heavy wood. The clock on the nightstand read 2:47 a.m., less than 4 hours since Bruno Storm had grabbed her wrist in the hallway. Less than 3 since she'd remembered Vanessa's face. Her entire world had collapsed in the span of a single evening. Charlotte pressed her palms against her eye, trying to slow her racing thoughts. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But underneath the fear ran something else. A strange relief at finally having a name for the ghost that had haunted her dreams for 20 years. Vanessa. The girl with the braids. The sister she'd forgotten. The lights went out. Not gradually, not with the flicker of a power surge. Just instant, complete darkness that swallowed the room whole. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. Through the windows, she could see the security lights in the garden had died too. The entire east wing had gone black. Then she heard the screaming. It came from downstairs. A man's voice cut short mid-shout, followed by the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Not the single pop of a handgun, but the rapid staccato of automatic weapons. Charlotte threw herself off the bed and hit the floor hard, her heart slamming against her ribs. More gunfire erupted in the hallway outside her room. Marco's radio squawked something urgent before it went silent. She heard his body hit the floor with a heavy thud that made her stomach turn. "East wing, second floor," a voice called out in the corridor. Male, cold, professional. "Third door on the left, make it quick." They were coming for her. Charlotte scrambled under the bed, pressing herself flat against the hardwood floor, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The door to her room crashed open. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, sweeping across the walls. Heavy boots moved across the carpet. "Check the bathroom," one voice ordered. "Bed's empty," another replied. Charlotte's hand clamped over her mouth to muffle the sound of her breathing. Through the narrow gap between the bed frame and the floor, she could see 3 pairs of boots, military grade. The men moved with tactical precision, splitting up to search the room. One set of boots approached the bed. Bullets suddenly tore through the wall behind her, wood and plaster exploding in a shower of debris. Charlotte bit down on her palm to keep from screaming. They were shooting blindly now, trying to flush her out. Another burst of gunfire ripped through the opposite wall. The mattress above her jerked as rounds punched through it, stuffing floating down like snow. "Movement in the hallway!" someone shouted from the corridor. The boots near Charlotte's hiding spot pivoted and rushed toward the door. She heard more gunfire, closer now, accompanied by shouts and the wet sounds of impact. A body crashed through her doorway and didn't get back up. The flashlight beams spun wildly across the ceiling. Then Bruno Storm's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Wrong room." What followed lasted maybe 30 seconds, but Charlotte would remember it for the rest of her life. The sounds of a brief, brutal fight, grunts of effort, bones breaking, a scream that ended abruptly, the wet thud of bodies hitting the floor in rapid succession, then silence. Heavy, final. "Charlotte?" Bruno's voice was rough, barely controlled. "Where are you?" She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just heard. "Charlotte, answer me right now." "Under the bed," she whispered. Light flooded the room as someone, one of Bruno's men, she assumed, hit the emergency generators. Charlotte saw Bruno's legs appear beside the bed, dress pants spattered with blood. He crouched down, his face coming into view in the narrow space. There was blood on his jaw, on his hands. His knuckles were split open. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. Charlotte shook her head mutely. "Can you move?" Another nod. Bruno reached under the bed and pulled her out with surprising gentleness, his hands careful despite the violence still clinging to them. Charlotte's legs gave out the moment she was upright. He caught her, one arm wrapping around her waist to keep her standing. She could feel him trembling, or maybe that was her. Maybe it was both of them. She made the mistake of looking past him. 3 bodies lay crumpled in and around her doorway, their masks pulled down to reveal faces she didn't recognize. Marco was sprawled in the hallway beyond them, unmoving. The walls were pocked with bullet holes. The smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air. "Don't look," Bruno said sharply, turning her face toward his chest. "Don't look at them." Charlotte pressed her forehead against his shoulder, her entire body shaking. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, holding her steady. For a moment, they just stood there in the wreckage while more guards thundered up the staircase and voices shouted status reports. "Someone knew." Bruno's voice was low, trembling, with barely contained rage. "Someone knew the moment I found you. The moment I saw that scar." His grip on her tightened. "Someone is trying to erase you, Charlotte, just like they erased her." The words sent ice through Charlotte's veins. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had been watching, waiting. In the moment Bruno Storm discovered a living connection to his missing sister, they'd sent killers. "We're moving you." Bruno said, pulling back to look at her face. His expression was harder than she'd seen it, all the vulnerability from the study replaced by cold determination. There's a secure location beneath the estate, underground. No one gets in without my authorization. You'll be safe there. Bruno, this isn't negotiable. He guided her toward the door, his body positioned between her and the corpses. Marco, he called to someone in the hallway, get a medical team up here, and I want every entrance to this estate locked down. No one enters, no one leaves. I don't care if the governor himself shows up. Charlotte let herself be led down the grand staircase, past guards with weapons drawn, past staff members huddled in doorways with terrified faces. They descended further, through a door hidden behind a bookcase in Bruno's study, down concrete steps that led deep beneath the mansion's foundation. The panic room was exactly what he'd promised. Reinforced steel walls, surveillance monitors, showing every angle of the estate, a small bedroom with a single cot. No windows. No way out except through the guards Bruno posted at the entrance. Charlotte stood in the center of the sterile space and wrapped her arms around herself. Her ears were still ringing from the gunfire. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Bruno paused at the door, looking back at her. The blood on his jaw had started to dry. He looked exhausted, furious, and underneath it all, devastated. I won't let them take you, he said quietly, whatever it costs. Whoever I have to go through. You're the only connection I have left to Vanessa. That makes you... He stopped himself, jaw clenching. That makes you too important to lose. The door closed with a hydraulic hiss, and Charlotte heard the locks engage. She was deeper underground than she'd ever been, surrounded by walls that could withstand an explosion, guarded by men with orders to shoot first and ask questions later. She'd never felt more trapped. And she'd never felt safer. The contradiction terrified her almost as much as the bullets had. Charlotte didn't sleep the first night underground. She sat on the narrow cot with her back pressed against the cold steel wall, watching the surveillance monitors cycle through their feeds. The estate above her looked peaceful now. Guards patrolling, lights restored. No sign of the violence that had shattered her room just hours before. By the second night, exhaustion won. She lay down fully clothed, too wired to change into the fresh clothes someone had left folded on the chair. The panic room's ventilation system hummed quietly, circulating air that tasted recycled and stale. Through the thick walls, she heard nothing. No footsteps, no voices. Just the mechanical rhythm of her own breathing and the distant hum of generators. Then the storm began. She felt it before she heard it. A low rumble that vibrated through the concrete foundation. Thunder. The surveillance monitors flickered as lightning struck somewhere close to the estate. Another crash of thunder, louder this time, rolling through the earth like the world was cracking open. Charlotte's eyes grew heavy. The rhythm of the storm became a lullaby, pulling her down into sleep despite her best efforts to stay alert. And then she was 7 years old again. The dormitory was always cold. Charlotte, though she didn't remember being called Charlotte then, had they called her something else, lay on the bottom bunk with a thin blanket pulled up to her chin. The springs above her creaked every time the girl in the top bunk moved. Moonlight filtered through the barred window, casting prison-striped shadows across the floor. There were 12 beds in this room. 3 were empty now. Their mattresses stripped bare. No one talked about where those children had gone. Thunder rattled the windows. Charlotte flinched, pulling the blanket tighter. Hey! A small voice came from the bunk beside hers. You awake? Charlotte turned her head. In the dim light, she could just make out the other girl's face peering over the edge of her bed. Braids with colorful beads. Big, frightened eyes. I'm awake, Charlotte whispered back. I'm scared. The girl, Vanessa, her name was Vanessa, climbed down from her bunk and crawled into Charlotte's bed without asking permission. They pressed together for warmth. 2 small bodies trying to make themselves invisible. Me too, Charlotte admitted. Another crash of thunder. Closer this time. Rain began hammering against the windows and sheets. My brother's coming for me, Vanessa whispered. He promised, but I don't think he knows where I am. Her voice cracked. What if they take me before he finds me? Take you where? Where they took the others. Vanessa's grip on Charlotte's hand tightened. I heard Mrs. Patterson talking on the phone last night. She said my name, said someone was willing to pay extra because I'm. She stopped like she couldn't say the rest out loud. Charlotte's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. When? Soon, maybe tomorrow, maybe tonight. Vanessa pulled back to look at Charlotte's face. We have to do something so he can find me, so you can find me, so someone remembers we were real. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Both girls froze, holding their breath. The footsteps paused at their door. A shadow passed across the gap beneath it, then continued on. Vanessa waited until the sound faded completely before moving. She reached under her mattress and pulled out something that glinted in the moonlight. A shard of broken glass, wrapped at one end with strips of torn sheet to form a makeshift handle. We have to mark each other, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Like blood sisters, but permanent. So no matter what happens, no matter where they take us, we'll have proof we existed, that we were together. That's going to hurt, Charlotte breathed. Everything hurts. Vanessa positioned the glass against Charlotte's forearm. But this hurt will mean something. The pain was instant and sharp, but Charlotte bit down on her blanket to muffle any sound. Vanessa's hand shook as she carved them, but her design was deliberate. 2 V's, one for each of them, intertwined so they couldn't exist separately. Sisters in blood and scar tissue. When she finished, Charlotte took the glass with trembling fingers. Your turn. Vanessa extended her arm, squeezing her eyes shut. Charlotte tried to match the pattern exactly, her hand steadier than she'd expected. The glass cut clean. Blood welled up in lines that looked black in the darkness. Now we promise, Vanessa whispered, pressing their bleeding forearms together. If they take me, you find me. If they take you, I find you. We don't forget. We don't give up. I promise, Charlotte said. Say it all. Say my name. I promise, Vanessa. I'll find you. Thunder crashed directly overhead, so loud it shook the building. Vanessa gripped Charlotte's arm harder, their blood mixing where the cuts pressed together. If they take me, Vanessa said, her voice breaking into sobs, find me. Promise me. Promise. I promise. I promise. The door burst open. Light flooded the dormitory. Mrs. Patterson stood silhouetted in the doorway, 2 men in dark clothes flanking her. There she is, Mrs. Patterson said, pointing. The storm girl. Get her in the van. Vanessa's scream tore through the night as the men grabbed her. She reached back toward Charlotte, their bloody fingers slipping apart. Charlotte tried to hold on, but she was too small, too weak. Vanessa, Vanessa, don't leave. Please don't leave me. Charlotte woke screaming. The sound ripped from her throat before she could stop it, raw and anguished. She was tangled in the cot's sheets, her body slick with sweat, her left forearm burning like the scar was being carved fresh. The door burst open. Bruno rushed in with 2 guards behind him, gun drawn. He scanned the room for threats before his eyes landed on Charlotte, who was curled into a ball on the cot, sobbing into her knees. Leave us, he ordered the guards. They hesitated only a second before retreating. Bruno approached slowly. Like she was something fragile that might shatter, he holstered his weapon and crouched beside the cot, his hand hovering near her shoulder, but not touching. Not yet. Charlotte. She couldn't answer. Couldn't see anything but Vanessa's terrified face being dragged away. Couldn't hear anything but her own child voice screaming promises she'd forgotten she'd made. Vanessa, Charlotte gasped between sobs. Vanessa, don't leave me. I promised I'd find you. Bruno went completely still. When Charlotte finally raised her head, she found him staring at her with an expression of absolute certainty. No more doubt. No more questions about whether her memories were real. You were there, he said, his voice rough. The night they took her. You were there. Charlotte nodded, unable to speak. Bruno's jaw clenched so tight she heard his teeth grind. The scar. You made them together. She said, Charlotte's voice broke. She said someone was coming for her. That same night. She knew. She carved my arm and I carved hers, and she made me promise to find her if she couldn't finish. Bruno's hand finally made contact, gripping her shoulder. A sister mark. We were sisters, Charlotte whispered. Not by blood, but by choice, by survival. She was the only person who, the words choked off into fresh sobs. Bruno pulled her forward into his arms without warning, holding her as she fell apart. His embrace was fierce, desperate, like he was trying to hold on to Vanessa through the only person who remembered her this way. You kept your promise, he said into her hair. You survived. You made it out. And now you're going to help me find her. Charlotte pressed her face against his chest, feeling the rapid hammer of his heart matching her own. She'd remembered, and the memory was worse than any nightmare she'd ever had, because it was real. Charlotte had been underground for 4 days when the guards started getting careless. They'd changed shifts at 6-hour intervals, always 2 men stationed outside the panic room's entrance. But at 3 in the morning, she'd noticed the handoff took longer. Coffee was fetched. Cigarettes were smoked in the stairwell. For maybe 5 minutes, the hallway outside her door sat empty. On the 5th night, Charlotte waited until she heard their voices fade up the stairs, then tested the door. Bruno had ordered it locked from the outside, but the mechanism was electronic. And electronic locks had emergency releases on the inside. Fire code required it. She found the manual override panel behind a steel plate and pressed the release. The door hissed open. Charlotte slipped into the corridor, her heart hammering. The underground level was larger than she'd realized, a warren of concrete passages lit by harsh fluorescent strips. Some led to mechanical rooms. She could hear the rumble of generators. Others ended in locked doors with keypads. She moved quickly, listening for footsteps. At the end of one corridor, she found a dead end that didn't quite look right. The concrete wall had a seam running along its edge, barely visible. Charlotte pressed her fingers against it and felt the panel shift slightly. She pushed harder. The section of wall swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow room beyond. Charlotte's breath caught. She pulled out her phone. They hadn't taken it since there was no signal underground, and used its flashlight to illuminate the space. The room was small, no bigger than a storage closet, but every surface was covered. Cardboard boxes lined the floor. Papers were pinned to the walls with rusted thumbtacks. A child's backpack sat on a wooden chair covered in dust, and there, on a makeshift shelf, a photograph of a smiling girl with braided hair, Vanessa. Charlotte stepped inside, her hands shaking as she reached for the backpack. Inside, she found a purple hairbrush, a worn copy of The Secret Garden, a notebook filled with a child's handwriting. Bruno's birthday is April 15th. Don't forget, he likes chocolate cake. She set the backpack down carefully and turned to the walls. Maps of Brooklyn and Queens covered in red marker, circling locations. Foster homes, Charlotte realized. Some had X's through them. Others had dates written beside them. One had a single word in capital letters. Pipeline. Beside the maps were financial ledgers, photocopies that looked like they'd been taken secretly. She recognized the Storm family letterhead. The entries detailed payments. Thousands of dollars going to organizations with innocuous names. Hope House. Safe Harbor Children's Services. New Beginnings Foster Network. Charlotte pulled one ledger from the wall and flipped through it. The handwriting was meticulous, masculine, definitely not Bruno's. Each payment had a notation beside it. 6 units transferred, 4 units placed. 2 units. She stopped. Units. They were calling children units. What are you doing in here? Charlotte spun around. Bruno stood in the doorway, still dressed from whatever business had kept him away from the estate. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loosened. But it was his expression that made her breath catch. Not anger, but something broken. Something devastated. I found it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I found this room, behind the wall. I wasn't trying to. I know. Bruno stepped inside, and Charlotte saw he was trembling. He looked around at the papers, the maps, Vanessa's belongings. His hand reached out to touch the photograph, but stopped short, like he couldn't bear to make contact. I know what you found. The silence stretched between them. Charlotte watched something crumble behind his eyes. My father, Bruno said, finally, his voice rough. Antonio Storm. He built half this empire on legitimate business. shipping, real estate, import-export. He laughed, bitter and sharp. The other half, the other half was built on this. He gestured at the papers around them. Children? Charlotte whispered. A pipeline. Bruno's jaw clenched. Connections to corrupt social workers, judges, foster system administrators. They'd identify vulnerable kids, ones with no family, no one looking for them. Move them through charity homes that were really holding facilities, then sell them to whoever was willing to pay. Domestic labor, overseas adoption mills, worse. Charlotte felt sick. Vanessa was never supposed to be part of it. Bruno's voice cracked. My father kept that business separate from the family. He had rules, lines he wouldn't cross. But Vanessa was curious. She was always curious. One day when she was 9, she followed him to one of his meetings, saw something she shouldn't have, overheard names, details. He picked up the notebook from Vanessa's backpack, his hands shaking so badly the pages rattled. He told me she'd been kidnapped by rivals, that someone was trying to hurt him by taking his daughter. I believed him. Bruno's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I was 19. I believed everything he told me, and I spent 17 years searching for her while he stopped, unable to finish. While he knew where she was, Charlotte finished quietly, while he paid someone to make sure she was never found. Bruno set the notebook down with exaggerated care. I discovered this room 6 months after he died. Heart attack. Quick. Clean. Never faced any consequences. The bitterness in his voice could have stripped paint. I've been trying to piece together what happened ever since. Following cold trails. Bribing old contacts. But everyone who knew anything real is either dead or disappeared. He turned to Charlotte, and she saw the raw desperation in his eyes. Until you. Charlotte's back pressed against the wall, surrounded by evidence of horrors she'd survived without understanding. I was supposed to be taken too. That's what you think. I know you were. Bruno pulled a file from one of the boxes and opened it. Charlotte saw her own face staring back. A school photo from when she was maybe 7. Paperwork with her name, or the name she'd had then. A red stamp across the top. Transfer scheduled. But someone had drawn a line through it. Written in the margin, marked, contaminated, abort. The scar. Charlotte breathed. They saw the scar and knew she'd told someone. Knew there was a witness. They couldn't risk taking you after that. Too many questions if 2 girls with matching scars went missing from the same facility. Bruno's hands fisted at his sides. So they left you there, but they took her. The weight of it crushed down on Charlotte's chest. She'd survived because Vanessa had marked her, because they'd made themselves sisters in blood and scar tissue. Vanessa had saved her life without meaning to. I'm sorry, Charlotte whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't remember. I didn't. Stop. Bruno closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He gripped her shoulders, not roughly but firmly. You were a child. You survived. That's not something to apologize for. Charlotte looked up at him, seeing past the Mafia boss, past the dangerous man who'd grabbed her wrist in the hallway. She saw someone drowning in 17 years of grief and guilt. I'll help you, she said. Whatever it takes. I'll remember everything. We'll find out what happened to her. Something shifted in Bruno's expression. The hostility that had defined their interactions cracked open, revealing something raw and almost hopeful underneath. We, he repeated quietly, like he was testing the word. Not just me, we. She was my sister, too. Charlotte's voice was steady now. I made her a promise. I'm going to keep it. Bruno's grip on her shoulders gentled. For a long moment, they stood in that small room filled with ghosts and evidence, 2 people bound together by a missing girl. Then we start tomorrow, Bruno said. Every memory you have, every detail. We put it all together. He looked around the room one more time. And we find out who did this. All of it. Charlotte nodded. She wasn't a prisoner anymore. She was a partner in hunting down the truth, even if that truth would destroy them both. Marco appeared at the panic room door 3 days after Charlotte and Bruno discovered the hidden room. His face was drawn, years older than when Charlotte had last seen him standing guard. He wouldn't meet Bruno's eyes. We need to talk, Marco said. Alone. Bruno looked up from the files spread across the table where he and Charlotte had been working. Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of her. Marco's jaw tightened. He glanced at Charlotte, then back to Bruno. It's about the attack, the one on her room. The air in the panic room went cold. Bruno stood slowly. Talk. The guards that night, they weren't just bypassed. They were told to stand down. Marco's voice was rough. Someone inside our network gave the order. Said it came from you. By the time they realized it was fake, the shooters were already in the East Wing. Charlotte's stomach dropped. Who? Bruno's voice was deadly quiet. That's the problem. The order came through encrypted channels we only use internally. Someone with access to our systems. Someone who knows our protocols. Marco finally met Bruno's gaze. Someone in your top circle. Bruno's expression went blank, the kind of emptiness that preceded violence. How long have you known this? I've suspected for weeks, but I couldn't prove it until yesterday. I ran traces on the communications, found payment records. Marco pulled out a tablet and set it on the table. Someone's been paid for 17 years to bury anything related to Vanessa, to redirect investigations, to make sure certain files disappeared. Charlotte moved to look at the screen. Bank transfers, coded payments, amounts that made her head spin. The same person who tipped them off about Charlotte, Marco continued. The moment you brought her to your study, someone made a call. Within 2 hours, those shooters were on their way. Names, Bruno said. Give me names. 3 possibilities. All with the right access. All with the opportunity. Marco's finger hovered over the tablet. Vincent, Michael. He stopped. Or who? Bruno's voice dropped dangerously low. Or Thomas. The silence that followed was suffocating. Charlotte knew that name. Thomas Ricci, Bruno's head of security, the man who'd been with the Storm family for 30 years, who'd taught Bruno to shoot, who'd been at Antonio Storm's side during the years Vanessa had disappeared. No, Bruno's voice was flat. Not Thomas. He has the access. He was there when your father ran the pipeline. He knows everything. Marco's hands were shaking. I don't want it to be him either, but we have to consider. Then we find out. Charlotte spoke before she'd fully formed the thought. Both men turned to look at her. We force them to show their hand. Bruno's eyes narrowed. How? We bait them. Charlotte's heart was racing, but her voice came out steady. I tell someone you trust, one of those 3 names, that I've remembered everything, that I saw faces the night Vanessa was taken, that I can identify everyone involved. Absolutely not, Bruno said immediately. You're not putting yourself out there as... It's the only way. Charlotte stood, facing him. If there's a traitor, they can't let me live with that information. They'll have to make a move. And when they do, you'll have them. Marco was already nodding. Could work. We control the environment. Set up surveillance. Wait for them to take the bait. Bruno looked between them, rage and fear warring on his face. If something goes wrong, then you'll be there, Charlotte said quietly. You won't let them take me, just like you didn't let them take me before. Something in Bruno's expression shifted. After a long moment, he nodded once. The trap was set for that evening. Charlotte sat in Bruno's study, the room wired with cameras hidden in book spines and light fixtures. She'd called Thomas Ricci personally, her voice breathless and excited. I remembered, she'd told him. Everything. I need to tell Bruno immediately. Can you come? I don't feel safe telling anyone else. Thomas had arrived within 30 minutes. He sat across from Charlotte now, his weathered face concerned. Take your time. Tell me what you remember. Charlotte leaned forward, playing her role. The night they took Vanessa, I saw them. Mrs. Patterson from the foster home. And 2 men. But there was someone else. Someone in the van, a man in a suit. I remember his face, his voice. He had a scar on his... Thomas's hand moved faster than she'd expected. The cloth pressed over her mouth and nose before she could scream, chemicals sweet and suffocating. Charlotte struggled, but his grip was iron. The room spun. The door burst open. Bruno appeared with Marco and 4 armed guards. Thomas released Charlotte immediately, but he was already surrounded. Don't! Bruno said, his gun aimed at the man who'd been like an uncle to him. Don't make this worse. Thomas's face was calm, resigned. It was always going to end this way. Charlotte gasped for air, her head clearing slowly. Bruno kept his weapon trained on Thomas, while Marco zip-tied the older man's hands behind his back. Why? Bruno's voice cracked on the word. Why would you? Your father's orders. Thomas met Bruno's gaze steadily. He said it was business, said Vanessa had become a liability. I was supposed to make sure she was never found, never connected back to the Storm family. You helped them take her, Bruno whispered. I drove the van. Thomas said it without emotion. Delivered her to the first safe house. Made sure the paper trail led nowhere. Bruno's gun hand shook. Charlotte saw his finger tighten on the trigger. How long? Bruno demanded. How long did she survive? Thomas's expression flickered, the first sign of emotion. 5 years, maybe longer. I stopped getting updates after that, but I know for certain she was alive 5 years after the kidnapping because I personally delivered payment to a safe house in Montreal, July 2012. She would have been 14. The gun fell from Bruno's hand, clattering on the hardwood floor. Alive, he breathed. She was alive for 5 years, and you knew. You knew, and you said nothing. Your father's orders, Thomas repeated, but his voice had lost its steadiness. Bruno's entire body was shaking now, rage and anguish pouring through the cracks in his control. Where is she now? Where's the safe house? Shut down. Raided by police in 2013. Everyone scattered. I don't know where. Bruno's fist connected with Thomas's jaw before anyone could stop him. The older man's head snapped back, again. Marco grabbed Bruno from behind, hauling him away while Thomas slumped in the chair, blood streaming from his mouth. Get him out, Bruno said, his voice wrecked. Lock him up. I can't look at him. Marco and the guards dragged Thomas from the room. The door closed, leaving Bruno and Charlotte alone in the sudden silence. Bruno stood in the center of his study, hands clenched at his sides, breathing like he'd run a marathon. Charlotte watched him fracture in real time, the mask of control he'd worn for 17 years finally shattering completely. She was alive, he said hoarsely. For 5 years, while I was searching everywhere else, while I trusted him. She was alive, and he knew exactly where she was. His knees buckled. Charlotte moved before thinking, catching him, wrapping her arms around him as he fell. They sank to the floor together, Bruno's weight collapsing against her. And for the first time since Charlotte had met him, the most dangerous man she'd ever known trembled like a child in her arms. I'm sorry, Charlotte whispered, holding him as tightly as she could. I'm so sorry. Bruno's hands fisted in her shirt, his face buried against her shoulder. He didn't cry, not quite, but the sound he made was worse than tears. A raw, agonized grief that had been buried for 17 years finally clawing its way out. Charlotte pressed her cheek against his hair and held on, understanding that this moment was changing everything between them. They weren't captor and prisoner anymore. They weren't even just allies. They were two people bound together by the ghost of a girl who'd survived 5 years longer than anyone had known. A girl who might still be out there waiting to be found. Charlotte couldn't sleep after Thomas's confession. She lay on the cot in the panic room, staring at the steel ceiling, her mind replaying Bruno's breakdown on the study floor. The way he'd shattered in her arms. The way she'd held him together while he fell apart. 5 years. Vanessa had been alive for 5 years. The thought wouldn't let Charlotte rest. At 4 in the morning, she gave up and made her way back to the hidden room. The guards had stopped trying to confine her after the trap with Thomas. Bruno had simply told them, she goes where she wants, as if something fundamental had shifted between them. Charlotte pushed open the concealed panel and slipped inside. The room felt different now, less like a tomb and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She sat cross-legged on the floor and began carefully sorting through Vanessa's belongings. The backpack yielded a hairbrush, the worn copy of The Secret Garden, the notebook with birthday reminders. But underneath, pressed flat against the bottom, Charlotte found a manila folder she'd missed before. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, rendered in crayon and colored pencil on whatever paper a 9-year-old could find. Some were typical childhood sketches, flowers, houses, stick figure families. But others were different, deliberate, strange. Symbols that looked almost like letters but weren't. Geometric patterns. Numbers scattered across the pages with no apparent logic. And on one page, a careful drawing of two hands clasped together, forearms exposed to show matching V-shaped scars. Charlotte's breath caught. She spread the drawings across the floor looking for patterns. "You're up early." She turned to find Bruno standing in the doorway, looking like he hadn't slept either. His shirt was wrinkled, his jaw dark with stubble, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in days, focused. "I found something," Charlotte said. "Drawings. I think Vanessa was trying to tell us something." Bruno knelt beside her, studying the papers. His hand hovered over the drawing of the clasped hands. "She drew these right before she was taken?" "I don't know. Maybe after? Thomas said she was alive for years. Maybe she found a way to leave messages." Charlotte picked up one page covered in symbols. These looked deliberate, like code. They worked in silence for 20 minutes, laying out every drawing, every scrap of paper. Bruno brought the maps and ledgers from the wall, cross-referencing dates and locations. Charlotte photographed everything with her phone, arranging the images side by side, looking for connections. Then she saw it. "The numbers," she said suddenly. "They're not random. Look." She grabbed 3 different drawings and laid them side by side. "This one has 315-13-5. This one has 21311. They're letter positions in the alphabet," Bruno finished, his voice tight with excitement. "COMEBACK. Charlotte's hands shook as she grabbed more drawings. Together they transcribed every number, Bruno calling them out while Charlotte wrote. The message emerged slowly, maddeningly incomplete because some drawings were missing or damaged. "Come back. Follow. The mark. She will." "There's more," Charlotte said frantically. "There has to be more." "Where else?" Bruno reached past her and pulled out the secret garden. The book fell open naturally to a dog-eared page. There, in the margins, more numbers. Tiny, precise, written in pencil so faint Charlotte had to hold the book under the light to see them. She read them aloud while Bruno transcribed, his handwriting getting messier as the message took shape. When they finished, they stared at the words in stunned silence. "Follow the one who carries my mark. She will lead you to me." Charlotte felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "She didn't write this for you." Bruno's voice was barely a whisper. "She wrote it for you." "But I was a child. I didn't." Charlotte's throat tightened. "How could she have known I'd ever find this, that I'd ever even remember her?" "She didn't know." Bruno set down the pen, his hand trembling slightly. "She had faith. She believed that somehow, someday, the girl she carved a scar with would find her way back. Would find me, would lead me to her." Charlotte pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed. All these years, she'd thought the scar was just a remnant of trauma, a mark of survival. But Vanessa had meant it as something else entirely, a beacon, a map, a promise that Charlotte was supposed to keep, even if she couldn't remember making it. "I was always supposed to find you," Charlotte said, the realization crashing over her. "That's why Thomas couldn't take me. Why they left me alone after they saw the scar. Because taking both of us would have been too obvious. But Vanessa knew. She knew eventually you'd find me, or I'd find you, and when we came together, we'd have the key to finding her." Bruno stood abruptly and began pacing, energy crackling off him. "She left breadcrumbs, not for me because she knew I might never see these drawings, but for the one person who would recognize the meaning in them, the one person who shared her mark." He turned to Charlotte, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. It wasn't the obsessive intensity from before. It was something deeper, something almost like reverence. "She chose you," he said quietly. "Out of everyone. She trusted you to finish what she started." Charlotte's chest ached. She thought of 7-year-old Vanessa, terrified and brilliant, carving codes into book margins while being held in a safe house. Never giving up, never stopping, always believing that her sister, her chosen sister, would somehow find her way back. "Then we have to follow the code," Charlotte said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "We have to figure out where she was leading us." Bruno knelt beside her again, and this time when he looked at her, it wasn't as a witness or a prisoner or even just an ally. It was as someone essential, Someone chosen. Montreal, he said. Thomas delivered payment there in 2012. That's where we start. Charlotte nodded, staring at Vanessa's message. The words seemed to glow in the dim light of the hidden room. Follow the one who carries my mark. She will lead you to me. I won't let you down, Charlotte whispered to the ghost of a 9-year-old girl with braided hair. I promise, not this time. Bruno's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. Two people bound by a missing girl who'd orchestrated their meeting from across 17 years and hundreds of miles. We leave tomorrow, Bruno said. Whatever it takes, whoever we have to go through, we follow Vanessa's map. Charlotte squeezed his hand, feeling the full weight of Vanessa's faith in her. The responsibility was crushing, but so was the sense of purpose. She'd been marked for a reason, and she was finally ready to see that reason through to the end. The drive to Montreal took 8 hours with a convoy of 3 black SUVs, armed guards in each vehicle. Charlotte sat beside Bruno in the middle car, watching the landscape shift from urban sprawl to rolling countryside to the edge of Quebec. Neither of them spoke much. The coded message sat between them like a third presence, heavy with expectation. Follow the one who carries my mark. She will lead you to me. Somewhere past the border, as rain began streaking across the windows, Charlotte's vision blurred, not from tears, from memory. She was back in that cold dormitory, the night everything changed. Charlotte? Bruno's voice came from far away. What's wrong? I remember the van, she whispered. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing the highway. She was seeing a dark vehicle parked outside the foster home's side entrance. It was white, panel van, no windows in the back. The license plate was covered in mud. Deliberately, I think. Bruno's hand found hers, grounding her. What else? A woman came with the men. She wasn't like Mrs. Patterson. This woman wore expensive clothes, pearls. Her nails were painted red, bright red, like blood. Charlotte's breathing quickened. She stood in the hallway while they grabbed Vanessa. She was giving orders, telling them to be careful, that she was premium merchandise. Bruno's grip tightened on her hand. Vanessa was screaming, reaching for me. I tried to hold on, but it was too small. Too weak. Tears streamed down Charlotte's face. The woman looked at me, saw our matching scars. She said, Charlotte's voice broke. She said, leave that one. She's contaminated now. No one will pay for damaged goods. The memory released her suddenly. Charlotte gasped, coming back to the present. Bruno was staring at her with an intensity that was almost painful. The woman with red nails, he said quietly. That's who we're looking for. Montreal's underground existed in layers, legitimate businesses on top, darker enterprises bleeding through the cracks beneath. Bruno had contacts here, people who owed the Storm family favors or feared them enough to cooperate. They moved through the city methodically, Charlotte's memories sharpening with each location. Blue curtains, she said suddenly as they drove through a residential neighborhood. The safe house had blue curtains, heavy ones. They kept them closed during the day. Marco, who'd insisted on coming despite the betrayal being so fresh, pulled up property records on his tablet. Thomas's payment records list an address. Rue Saint-Antoine. Want me to? Go, Bruno ordered. The building was a narrow townhouse squeezed between two larger structures, its facade worn and unremarkable. The kind of place designed to be invisible. Bruno's men swept it first before allowing Charlotte and Bruno inside. The interior was dusty, abandoned. Furniture remained, but covered in sheets. The air smelled stale. But when Charlotte climbed the stairs to the second floor and saw the window with its heavy blue curtains still hanging, something inside her chest cracked open. This is it, she breathed. This is where they brought her. Bruno moved through the rooms methodically, looking for anything, documents, photos, any trace of his sister. In what must have been a bedroom, he found marks on the wall, scratches, tallies counting days, and carved deep into the windowsill. So small Bruno almost missed it. V.S. Vanessa Storm. She was here, Bruno said, his voice hoarse. They searched for 2 hours, tearing through closets and pulling up floorboards. Marco's team interviewed neighbors, though most claimed to remember nothing about the building's occupants. It wasn't until they were about to leave that Charlotte noticed the loose brick in the kitchen fireplace. Behind it, wrapped in plastic, was a folded piece of paper. Charlotte's hands shook as she opened it. The handwriting was childish but determined, pressed hard into the paper like the writer had been desperate to make sure it would survive. To whoever finds this, my name is Vanessa Storm. I was kidnapped from Brooklyn in 2007. They brought me here, but I'm not staying. I'm getting out. I'm going to find my way home. If Bruno comes looking for me, tell him I tried. Tell him I never stopped trying. Tell him I love him and I'm sorry I couldn't hold on. Tell Charlotte I kept my promise. We're still sisters. V.S. June 2012. The paper fell from Charlotte's fingers. She made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp, and her legs gave out. Bruno caught her, sinking down to the floor with her, the note clutched between them. She escaped, Charlotte said through tears. She didn't wait for them to let her go. She escaped. Bruno's hands were shaking as he read the note again. June 2012. That's a month before Thomas made his last payment delivery. Before the police raid. Marco appeared in the doorway. I found someone, a neighbor who remembers. She says there was a girl living here, teenager, quiet, never came outside. One day there was a commotion, the girl ran. The people living here scattered. Police showed up a week later, but everyone was gone. Where did she run to? Bruno demanded, standing and pulling Charlotte up with him. She doesn't know, but she remembers the girl headed toward the metro station. That's the last anyone saw of her. Charlotte pressed both hands to her mouth, overwhelmed. Vanessa had been 14, alone, running from traffickers who would have killed her if they'd caught her, but she'd escaped. She'd fought her way out. She wanted us to know, Charlotte said, looking at Bruno through her tears. She wanted us both to know she fought, that she tried to come home. Bruno's expression was fierce, pain and pride warring on his face. He pulled Charlotte close, his arms wrapping around her as if she were the only thing keeping him upright. When he spoke, his voice was rough but certain. We will find her, he said into her hair. Alive or dead, whatever it takes, however long it takes. I swear it, Charlotte. On everything I am, on everything I have, we will find her. Charlotte held on to him, feeling the promise settle into her bones. They were so close now. Following a trail 17 years old, chasing a girl who'd been brave enough to run when she had every reason to give up. Vanessa had believed they would come for her, had faith that her brother and her chosen sister would find each other and follow her map. She'd been right, and Charlotte would not, could not, let that faith be for nothing. She's still out there, Charlotte whispered against Bruno's chest. I can feel it. She's still out there somewhere. Bruno pulled back to look at her, and in his eyes Charlotte saw the same desperate hope she felt in her own heart. Then we keep searching, he said, until we bring her home. Behind them, Marco was already making calls, pulling favors, reaching out to contacts across Montreal and beyond. The hunt had evolved from a cold case to an active investigation, from a 17-year-old tragedy to a rescue mission that still had a chance of ending in reunion rather than grief. Charlotte picked up Vanessa's note again, reading the words that had waited 5 years in darkness to be found. Tell Charlotte I kept my promise. We're still sisters. I'm coming, Charlotte whispered to the ghost of her childhood. We both are. Just hold on a little longer. They returned to the Storm estate 3 days after Montreal. The mansion felt different now, no longer a prison but a war room. Maps covered Bruno's study walls, tracking every lead, every whisper, every fragment of information they'd gathered. Charlotte had moved out of the panic room and into a guest suite on the 3rd floor. No guards outside her door, no locks keeping her in. She could leave whenever she wanted. She stayed. The break came on a rain-soaked Thursday evening. Marco burst into the study where Charlotte and Bruno were reviewing travel records from 2012. His tablet clutched in his hand. I found something, he said, breathless. A name, connected to the woman with red nails. Bruno was on his feet immediately. Who? Katerina Volkov. She ran a high-end trafficking network through Montreal and Toronto until 2015. Specialized in... Marco's voice hardened. Specialized in children, the premium ones. She's the one who would have handled Vanessa's placement. Charlotte's stomach turned. Where is she now? Dead. Killed in 2016, but her second-in-command is still operating. Marco pulled up a photo, a man in his 50s with cold eyes and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Dmitry Volkov, her brother. He took over what was left of the network. And according to my source, he's been running a safe house in Toronto for the last 8 years. How reliable is this source? Bruno's voice was controlled, but Charlotte could see the tension in his shoulders. Very. He owes me his life. Marco set the tablet on the desk. But there's more. Dmitry keeps records, files on every kid who passed through his sister's network, names, photos, placements. If Vanessa survived past 2012, if she was moved again, he'll have documentation. The room fell silent. This was it, the lead they'd been chasing for weeks, the closest they'd come to real answers. When do we leave? Charlotte asked. Bruno turned to her, and something flickered in his expression. We don't. I do. You've done enough. No. Charlotte stood, meeting his gaze steadily. I'm going with you. She left that message for me. She chose me to finish this. I'm not stopping now. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Bruno nodded once, sharp and decisive. We leave tomorrow morning. Marco, I want a full tactical team. If Dmitry resists, I want options. Marco left to make arrangements. The door closed behind him, leaving Charlotte and Bruno alone in the study. Rain hammered against the windows, the sound filling the silence between them. Bruno moved to the window, his back to Charlotte. I never thanked you. For what? For trusting me, when you had every reason not to. He turned, and the vulnerability in his expression made Charlotte's breath catch. I grabbed you in that hallway, interrogated you, kept you prisoner. You should hate me. Charlotte crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet from him. You were looking for your sister. I understand that now. I would have done the same. Would you? Bruno's voice was quiet. Or would you have been kinder? More patient? I don't know. Charlotte looked down at her forearm, at the faded double V scar. But I know Vanessa believed we'd find each other. She had faith that when we did, we'd do whatever it took. Even the hard things, even the cruel things if necessary. Bruno's hand reached out, his fingers hovering over her scar, before gently tracing its outline. The touch was feather-light, reverent. Charlotte's skin tingled under his fingertips. You were the last person she loved, Bruno said, his voice rough. Before they took her, before everything. You were the one she carved this mark with, the one she trusted with her promises and her pain. Charlotte's throat tightened. And you were the brother she died trying to return to, every escape attempt, every code she left, every moment she survived. It was all to find her way back to you. Bruno's thumb pressed against the center of the scar, where the two V's intersected. I spent 17 years searching for her, turned over every stone, interrogated every contact, destroyed anyone who got in my way, but I never found the one thing that mattered. What's that? You. Bruno's eyes met hers, dark and intense. The missing piece, the witness, the sister she chose, the one person who could lead me back to her. His hand slid from her forearm to her palm, fingers intertwining with hers. You're not just a witness, Charlotte. Not just a survivor. Not just someone who happened to cross my path. Then what am I? The question came out barely above a whisper. You're the reason I'm going to find her. Bruno's grip on her hand tightened. You're the proof that Vanessa's faith meant something, that her promises weren't empty, that love, the kind of love that makes two terrified children carve scars into each other's arms, can survive 17 years and bring the right people together when it matters most. Tears streamed down Charlotte's face. She didn't try to stop them. When we get to Toronto, Bruno continued, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous, when we find Dmitry and get those files, whatever we discover, whatever truth we uncover, we face it together. You and me, the way Vanessa meant it to be. Together, Charlotte echoed. Bruno raised their clasped hands, studying the scar on her forearm one more time. When he looked at her again, something had shifted in his expression. The grief was still there. It would always be there, but so was determination, purpose, and something that looked almost like hope. Whoever took her, he said quietly, each word deliberate and weighted with promise. Whoever hurt you, whoever tried to erase you both from existence, They chose the wrong family. The rain intensified outside, wind rattling the windows. But inside the study, surrounded by maps and evidence, and the ghost of a girl who'd believed in impossible reunions, Charlotte felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness, of destiny, maybe, though she'd stopped believing in such things years ago. She squeezed Bruno's hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. Then, let's make them regret it. A slight smile touched Bruno's lips, the first real smile Charlotte had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger, almost hopeful. Tomorrow we hunt. And we don't stop until we bring her home. Charlotte nodded. Or burn down everyone who stands in our way. Or that. They stood together as night fell over the Storm estate. Two people bound by a scar and a promise and a missing girl who'd orchestrated their meeting from across time and distance. The hunt wasn't over. The pain wasn't healed. The questions weren't answered. But they had each other now. And they had Vanessa's faith guiding them forward. Whatever came next, whatever horrors or revelations or heartbreak waited in Toronto, they would face it the way Vanessa had always meant them to. Together as family, with the kind of love that left permanent marks and refused to be forgotten. Bruno's thumb traced one final circle over Charlotte's scar before releasing her hand. Get some rest. Tomorrow changes everything. Charlotte moved toward the door, then paused. Bruno? Yes? Thank you for not giving up on her. For 17 years. Thank you for searching. His expression softened. Thank you for surviving, for carrying her mark, for remembering when it mattered most. Charlotte left him standing by the window, silhouetted against the storm. As she climbed the stairs to her room, she touched her scar and whispered a promise to the sister she'd lost and found and lost again. I'm coming, Vanessa. We both are. Just hold on a little longer. The storm raged on through the night, and in the morning they would begin the final hunt together.